Welcome to Next Future Today, hosted by Dan Keldsen, co-founder of Plexicam.com. Find more episodes at nextfuturetoday.com, on YouTube, or in your favorite podcast app. All right, let's dive on into it.
Hey folks, Dan Keldsen here, host of Next Future Today and co-founder of Plexicam.com. My guest today for Next Future Today is Andy Alsop, founder and CEO of The Receptionist, which I keep thinking is like a movie, The Receptionist, and it's a thriller, and I don't know, James Bond pops in, I'm not sure, but welcome, Andy.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's, do you know the company,
I don't.
It's MMHMM, all lowercase. It's an app, Mac. It was Mac first. I don't know if it's on Windows as well, but one of the guys who is part of AOL, I believe, is behind it, and it's like the most awesome product name. It's either the best product name ever or the worst. I'm not sure, but it is fun to say, "Hey, have you heard of?"
The reaction you get.
The Receptionist. Yeah, I see Receptionist all the time. What are you talking about?
Right. It starts a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So I like, and we'll talk. I'm hoping that we'll talk about branding and marketing and things like that, because I think that's a big part of what has powered you folks. But The Receptionist, for people who have never heard of you, have heard of Receptionist, but not of your company, what is it that The Receptionist is about? And I'd like to, so the purpose of this series that I'm doing is life, mostly right now anyhow, life before COVID, what was happening in your business. COVID happens, and how do you react to it, and how do you create your next future today without delaying it? So in the context of that, what was The Receptionist leading up to COVID, like in the last couple of years before that?
Well, it's funny you say that, because The Receptionist has stayed the same, but it's been an interesting journey. I think pretty much everybody could say the same thing. There's companies like Zoom who just, it couldn't have been better for their business, the pandemic.
Yep.
For us, not so much, but we have grown in every single quarter since the company started through the pandemic, so I'm happy about that. But The Receptionist simply is that when you walk into a business and there's an iPad there that you check in on, and then that iPad lets you, the person you're there to see, know that you're there. That's basically what we do. We process visitors when they walk through the door. We work in tandem with a live receptionist who may not want to be sitting there, having people sign a sheet or whatever else, would like to give them more personal experience and not be tied to the desk all the time. Or we also just work where the receptionist, our software, is sitting on an iPad, even in I think they call them man traps, which probably isn't even PC these days. It's got to be like a person trap or something. But, one of those that you walked into a vestibule and you'll check in on the iPad, and then somebody comes down and unlocks the door for you. So that's what it is, an ability to check in on an iPad, and it does the reception work for the company. And it's quite valuable because now they have a log of their visitors. It's not a scratched, a bunch of chicken scratch on a piece of paper and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And maybe I've been watching Designated Survivor recently, and it ended like 10 years ago or something, but I finally got around to watching it. But so I have all sorts of, there's lots of conspiracy stuff going on in that series, and who actually signed that, and who was that? Did they have a mask on? So yes, and in general, there's a reason why my notes for interviews are on a computer and not scratched up by hand, because I can't read my own handwriting. So yes, I feel your pain. And so this is called visitor management software. Is that correct?
Yeah, VMS, visitor management software, is kind of the category that's been developed, and it's a category that's been around for a while. It hasn't always been on an iPad. So 20 years ago, you would check in on a computer or something like that, or there's actually somebody behind a desk who's actually typing in your name when you get there. That was still called visitor management, but it's now modernized where it can be on an iPad.
Okay. And so, and who were the kinds, pre-COVID again? Who were the kinds of companies that would purchase your software? Is it small companies, big companies? What kind of industries?
You name it. Name it. We serve pretty much every industry. When I look at our industry categories, because of course we're keeping track of all of it, it's just, could be food manufacturer, could be psychiatrist, could be dentist, could be hair salons. It could be, you just name it. A lot of corporate offices. So you'll have big chains, but their corporate offices need to keep track of who's coming and going. And so it's definitely a variety. And in terms of pre-COVID, people were using visitor management because they knew it was a way to modernize their front office. It gave them a better look. When you have a visitor coming in, if you have a VIP coming in and they're going and scratching their name on some list, as opposed to now they've got this like slick iPad, and the iPad actually lets the person know, wow, that gives you kind of an image. So we had a lot of people who needed it for, being able to track their visitors. They wanted to have it look more modern, things like that. Pandemic hits, all of a sudden, COVID screening. They want to make sure that people are coming through the door. So we had a ton of business that came to us for those businesses who still had people coming to their office, because a lot of businesses didn't have anybody come into their office at all. So that didn't help us. But for the ones that did, those people were coming in and they needed to know that they had had their COVID shot. How long had it been? All these other things. So they were using our system to make sure that they were coming through processed. And that was a pain. We had a couple of pictures of one business that was trying to do COVID screening, and they took pictures and they actually had people going from one station to another station, and there were people physically with a clipboard, okay, this and everything else. And then they realized their system's like a visitor management system. They installed our software, and all they had was one station. Just walk up to the iPad, and it did all the work for them. They still had a person there to verify. But anyhow, it was kind of neat that people could use our software to automate that process.
Right.
And then I'll take it post-COVID. Then there were companies that all of a sudden said, COVID's not bad anymore. We don't need this system. So that was, there's been kind of, I'm not going to lie, it's been a roller coaster. But as I said, we've grown in every single quarter since we started the company through COVID. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of our team, how we hung in there and stuff. But that's kind of what it looked like in the 3 phases.
Gotcha. Okay. And so there's, so I have a technology background. Before that, I have a music background, which is less applicable, but potentially. So it's very easy to get sort of obsessed with technology. Technology is going to solve whatever problem you have. There's been plenty of, I've done a lot of like process efficiency work. And if you come in as a consultant doing that, some people will love you because it's, for me, I'm there to make life easier. Some people see that, he's coming in to help reduce headcount, which has never been my intention. I'm much more human focused than a lot of folks that are in the enterprise IT world. But there's a line here where you could modernize and go totally self-service, which has happened in a lot of different situations, right? Is there any sort of like indicator for the kind of business that would buy your solution on how they think about customer experience or employee experience or user experience more generically? So
do you mean maybe, because it sounds like you might be going at something that we get a lot, which is, are we putting receptionists out of jobs?
Well, I mean, we could. I don't think you are, because what I looked into is you're not trying to do that. But is it? I'm trying to, like, part of what I'm trying to do with Next Future Today is, what are the signals of companies who are going to be able to adapt to whatever comes next, right after COVID? Now, you could go all self-service, which potentially there still is a lot of bad self-service experiences, right? Like bagging your own groceries. Why am I bagging the groceries when it's not my business to do that? Why am I doing that? So arguably not an awesome self-service experience, but is, I guess from the DNA of a company, are there signs that your customers, before they become customers, they look like they could be good customers because they put thought into designing experiences? For example, like, Apple stores, famous for being very embracing, overstaffed compared to most others. Do you see signs like that, or is that me just having wishful thinking that designing experiences is a thing?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. In fact, we just had a large chain of behavioral health clinics won't mention their name, of course, for confidentiality, but they're adopting our solution. They're putting it into each one of their behavioral health clinics to improve the experience. It used to be if you went into a doctor's office or something like that, you would go up to a window to check in. In a behavioral health clinic, a lot of times that couldn't be the case because they can't really afford under that model to have somebody full-time there.
Right.
And so the idea is they wanted to create an experience when you walk in for your appointment where now they've designed their entire entryway and the reception area so that it's kind of focused around the iPads. They actually installed 2 of them so they could handle the flow that came through.
Sure.
And it meant as people are coming in, they're welcomed, and it's the kind of the design of the reception area that you're kind of focused on. That's where I go to sign in. And now, instead of what happens in behavioral health is you get the kind of gophering, where the therapist is sticking their head out. Is my person here yet?
Right.
Are they here yet? And there's nothing that indicates. And now what happens is they're sitting in their, in their office and they're getting a message. So they're sitting at their desk, they're finishing up their work, maybe from the last appointment that says, oh, your 2:00 is here.
Right.
And they're able to go out and say, hey, Andy, how you doing? Good to see you. Come on back. And so it kind of, that experience, not only the human experience, but also the design as well, has been fully integrated into that. And that's really where a lot of companies will see us coming in is to help with that experience. And I'm not gonna lie. There's some businesses that adopt it and say, we really want a human being out there welcoming our guests. So we're going to go back to it. And we're just like, we understand that's the way it goes. Sometimes they feel that is the most important experience. Sometimes law firms are the ones that get that. A lot of times law firms don't want you checking in. You're like, oh, I'm going to charge you, $600 an hour, and then I'm going to make you check in on an iPad. It's like, no, we want a human being out there. And that's part of the experience as well. Right.
You don't do like diamond encrusted iPads for that kind of situation?
Well, we could. Yeah, exactly. Make a little, coffee thing that pops out so you can just grab your cup of coffee.
There you go. Yeah.
An attachment we could put on it.
There you go. And facial recognition so it knows exactly.
Anyhow. Oh, yeah. What kind of coffee you like? Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Joe. Do you still like, double espresso, whatever? So the whole experience design piece is interesting because there can be sort of this, it's often at odds. So automation, self-service, human touch, they potentially don't mix together. But from what I was looking at to do some research on you guys before we talked, there's potentially a better mix of that because a lot of automation, in my opinion, should be to take away the stuff that's just mindless and repetitive and double or triple or quadruple data entry and chicken scratch on a piece of paper. So it seems like there should be of your clients who they're happy with total self-service in a friendly way that this greets them and helps behind the scenes. It's probably started with purely human interaction and tried your service and then decided, like law firms, that it wasn't for them, so they went back. Is there a sort of mix of how can you tell if it's likely to really find a good home in their environment?
Well, I think most of it is education. We don't do a ton of outbound sales right now, so not pushing everybody to you should buy our software and stuff. We do most of our sales comes from inbound, and usually what that means is that the customers are coming to us because they're trying to solve a problem. We get an incredible number of referrals too, so they may have talked to somebody who said, "Hey, we put this system in. You wouldn't believe it. It's how much it's helped." Some of the things that you find are, like, for instance, before this happened, you usually ended up going up to somebody who was sitting at the desk. That person would then have to call somebody on their desk phone. And that person who they're there to meet is actually in the bathroom or run over in a meeting. And so then the person is like sitting down on the couch, and then the person at the front desk is going back and forth saying, well, hopefully that person will be with you, and it was just kind of an inefficient process.
Right.
And so the visitors like it better because now they're actually checking in and they have the opportunity to send a message directly. And in fact, we've integrated two-way communication. So if I text you and you're like, I'm still in a meeting, but you can sit there and say, I'm still in a meeting, just hang tight, I'll be there in a little bit. Now you're getting a message back to that person. It gives them such a better experience,
Right.
And so I think once they implement that, they usually say this, we're never going back again, because it's with the exception of the law firm that is willing to pay somebody and make sure that they have all the tools they need to be able to contact the right person and get the guest into the place they need to go. But that's very infrequent they go back. Because this is, how many times have you gone to a business or a facility and there's a phone on the wall and then like a typed out list of the extensions you have to call when you want to like get into the building, and you call the extension and nobody's there, and it's like you're just frustrated. Now you're in this vestibule and you can hardly get out of it, right? And now you're sitting here with an iPad and there's something coming, it's being sent as a text message. So even if the person's on the factory floor, they're getting it. Oh God, okay, Andy's here. Hey, Andy will be right there, and they go, oh great, okay, I got contact. So that's the value that it really brings.
Right. So I think one thing that I've noticed through COVID, there are a lot of, it's very easy to say no to, let's call it improvement. Nobody likes change except a baby in a dirty diaper, right? Which is absolutely not true, but it evokes a certain image.
It does.
So it's, like restaurants, for example, ghost restaurants were not a thing, or not really a thing, until COVID hit and people realized I don't need to have a fancy restaurant storefront because nobody can come in here and eat. So they went suddenly from there. Maybe they didn't even have that great of an experience in the restaurant anyhow, potentially. But if they were underinvested in being able to take orders online, for example, which has been possible. I mean, I live in Massachusetts, and I know people from MIT who had hand-coded crazy little robots back in the 80s to order sushi. So it's been possible for a long time, but it didn't hit the mainstream until it became obvious that, like there used to be lines at some restaurants for 2 hours just to pick up food because they had no system to handle it.
Right.
They just keep taking the orders until they fell apart, and then everybody's pissed off, right? So I think the same thing can happen in a lot of situations like that, where it's just, if you say no too often or all the time, suddenly you find yourself maybe 5, 10, 20 years behind the times. And then maybe you can catch up. Maybe you can't, because that's a lot of ground to make up. I actually talk in the Gen Z Effect, the book that I co-wrote with my partner. I call it slingshotting. So in some ways, the crazy people, like me for sure, maybe you, early adopters, innovators, if you follow the chasm model, will chase a lot of things, but way before it's done, way before it's even probably even a good idea. Perhaps sane people should wait a while so that the bugs can get worked out and the cost comes down and it's friendlier. But essentially, in a situation like COVID, it actually, to me, part of what's fascinating to me is who survived through that sort of on purpose because they were already set up to be on top of things and sort of be willing and able to adapt, and how many had to go, and there's got to be some solution so we can keep selling, sushi or Thai food. There's a Thai food place that I'm thinking of specifically. That realm of, potentially you can really jump to another level, essentially. Ironically, it seemed like it happened a lot during COVID, especially the early days, because there was no solution. Did you experience that in your business?
No, let me think about that, because I think that it's interesting. I thought of some examples while you were talking about it, is that we had, and then maybe this is what you're talking about. I hadn't actually heard the term shadow businesses, but there's this really, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, as we talked about, and the company is up in Denver. But in Santa Fe, there's a Chinese restaurant called Chow's, and it's been here forever. I mean, ever since I moved here 27 years ago. And the pandemic really hurt them. And so they shut their dining room, and they just made that basically it was like a window, and you would use their online ordering system, and they decided they weren't going to do anything more than just sitting down, or I'm sorry, not sitting down, but picking up.
Right.
And it really was interesting. They never came back. I kind of thought, well, they'll probably come back. And they're like, no, we like doing it this way. We pretty much have as much business as we did, and we don't have to have all the waiters and waitresses, and the wait staff. And now we just kind of put it through this window. So that's what kind of reminded me. In terms of our business, I'm trying to figure out if that's how I can make a good analogy to that. I can't say that we saw changes, definitely saw changes in terms of buying habits and why people were why they were selecting our system. And, I think I'm very proud of the fact that we've gone through and sort of had to quickly shift, just like you were describing.
Yep.
One way is that people didn't want to touch the iPad, so they had to have a contactless feature. And so the engineering team at the company just pivoted. And we were I wouldn't say we're one of the first, maybe one of our competitors got ahead of us, but we put out something very good, very quickly that was architected in such a way where you could now check in on your phone when you got to the actual place, and instead of having to check in on the iPad because nobody wanted to actually touch the iPad.
Right. Yeah.
That was very, very popular, and it was something we had to have. So I think maybe, I don't know if that's kind of an example or something that I would say is something that we had to do, that we had to shift. And thank goodness we did. It helped our business continue to grow. And that's now even evolving into additional functionality that we're adding in, because that's turned out it was very popular. People want to be able to check in on their phones and stuff. So
yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, that's part of, and this is just a mental exercise, because who knows, but part of what I'm interested in is, what if COVID hadn't happened? Would what you offer today, the way that your business is organized, who you've hired, et cetera, what would still be the same? And what do you think, like what had you envisioned in 2020 that 2022 might have, if you even thought about it?
Well, I mean, I think we envisioned it definitely did not involve a contactless feature. So that's one thing.
Okay.
We had a full roadmap of the things we wanted to build into the application, and then what COVID did is just totally shuffle the deck, because we had to go back and say, whoa, hold on, what do we need to do differently? And it was great just because I feel, again, very proud of our team, because we have a very cohesive team, and it was our sales team and our marketing team that were saying, this is what we're hearing people want and what people need. And our engineering group was very quick to go ahead and start making those changes, and including also our customer experience team and what they were telling us and what the existing customers were telling us. So that we definitely changed in terms of what we learned from, January, February, March 2020 until, in the next few years. That's the way we knew we needed to go. Okay. So I would say we changed. I think contactless is just one thing that we did. I'm trying to remember some of the other things that we added onto the application, but definitely shuffled the deck in terms of what we were prioritizing for development purposes for our customers. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it is. I mean, it's funny that it sort of highlighted opportunities that had existed for a lot of companies, but they didn't realize that they might actually need it, not just want it. They might need it to avoid, like I have to say, I've become less fond of touchscreens since COVID has been a thing. But is that a permanent feature of life on planet Earth? I don't know, but being able to go to the next step, voice recognition, like fingerprint recognition. Do you want fingerprint recognition in something that beyond touchscreens, where everybody has to stick their thumb on the same sensor? Does it auto clean, all that kind of stuff? So I'd like to. I know part of what your push has been around employee supremacy, which sort of bigger topic is culture. Mm-hmm. So part of what I've been exploring through NextFutureToday is, are there signifiers within culture that they're sort of built to be ready for? some would call it, anti-fragile, resilient. There's a lot of different things you could call it. Those seem like a little hoity-toity to me. But are you sort of fit for change is one way that I would think about it. So you acquired the company back in 2005, was it?
2015.
2015. All right. What's 10 years? It's the same thing.
Give or take 10 years.
It's all the same. I don't know. The last 2 years seems like 20 years. So during the banning, and we don't have to talk about how you acquired it and all that, but that's an interesting story for people that want to hear more. Early days, culture was not a thing, from what I understand. Right? It was we need to make this business work. Essentially, was really the driver. Is that fair?
Pretty fair. I mean, I think my co-founder Dylan Berry and I have been working together. I'll back up a little bit. I bought the business in April of 2015. It was only serving about 130 locations at that time, and so really very small business. And I needed to figure out who I was going to bring on board and how I was going to get this going and everything else. So I ended up with kind of building the team, but building it slowly. And the thing about Dylan and I is that we've been very aligned on how we want to bring team members on, who we want to bring team members on, and how we want to treat them from a company's perspective. And but we didn't know that was employee supremacy. And so in the beginning, we were just wanting to make sure that we treated people really well, and we didn't want to just be one of these, drive at all costs kind of company. And I don't know if you know the better.com example, and there's tons of examples out there of that type of company that you either work 80 hours a week or you're out the door kind of stuff. Yeah. And we knew that we wanted that. So we continued forward with that. And so, but we still wanted to grow. And it was in the beginning, I have two brothers who helped invest in the business early. One started a company, took it public, did the whole thing, left when it was 3,000 employees, listed on the NASDAQ. My other brother is a well-known venture capitalist. And so it was sort of like, okay, I'm going to probably follow what my brothers did. We're going to go get tons of venture capital and we're going to duke it out and we're going to do all this. And I realized actually through their advice, they said, this is a company or a business that can really grow through cash flow. I don't think you need a whole bunch. And it was like this sort of moment where I felt like I didn't have to go and do that traditional route of, bring down $100 million in venture capital, which it so happens is pretty much all of our competitors. They did that as well. Yep. So I think it was the kind of the beginning of that, of being able to start the company with that mindset. And it gave me a huge sense of relief, to be honest with you. I didn't want to go out and sell, 30% of the company and then sell another 10 and then, and just constantly going through rounds of funding and stuff. Yeah. So it's given us, I think, a great advantage, because that meant that what I've been able to do is really focus on what the needs of our employees are, and then not necessarily focus on just what the shareholders are telling me has to happen because they've dumped all this money into it. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's really kind of like where, again, this pre-pandemic story, that's where we were. Right.
Okay. I mean, I don't remember if it was, by the way, Mike, your director of marketing, is who put us in touch for people who are not aware of what happened behind the scenes. I initially asked him if he wanted to be interviewed, but he said, "Oh no, you should definitely you should talk to the big guy and get the real story about employee supremacy." So shout out to him for. I think that's a positive sign of culture, in my opinion, that he didn't want to take the spotlight because there's a bigger story to be told. So I don't know if that's a thing in your company, but to me, it shows a sign of maturity in caring.
And the person you're speaking about is Michael Ashford, my director of marketing, and he's very much he is a fantastic individual, and as are all the employees in the company and everything. But and he said that to me. He exactly as you said. He said, "I think this is one I think you should do, Andy. This is one where you could talk about employee supremacy and things like that." So great. Sounds good.
Yeah, and that's the first time I've ever been diverted like that. And I don't even know how many interviews I've done. It's like 300 or something. And that's the first time.
Wow.
So
Wow. All right. That means a lot.
So I would. That's pretty interesting. I think that's there's some little nuancy things here that might get glossed over in a lot of situations, and probably not written up in like a Harvard Business Review kind of case study or something. But there's signs of really bad cultures, like the no asshole rule by Bob Sutton that he wrote 10 years ago or so. Such an awesome title. At some point I want to gather the courage to write another book that is similarly pointed, but there's signs of bad companies, there's signs of good companies, and it's what makes it bad. It's the culture, which is how people treat each other. So so employee supremacy, one thing I want to say is that, I didn't do intense research on your company. I did watch some of the interviews that the two of you did, Mike and you, which beautiful setup, and the quality is so good, and the nice banter there, which I really appreciated. Part of the strongest cultures that I've experienced myself it gets treated very seriously, but I don't mean like sternly. Mm-hmm. It's a serious initiative that has to go on forever, essentially. And part of it is you need to brand it, because if you can't brand it or make it stick, I'm a huge fan of the Made to Stick. I think that's what it is. The Heath brothers about 15 years ago wrote that. Made to Stick. There we go. How purposely did you go about, so employee supremacy is an interesting phrase that certainly caught me, wait, is that a good thing? Like supremacy, not so good as a word in recent years, potentially, but you need sort of polarizing, or at least, jolts to the mind to get people to actually pull things in. So what was your process to come up with that, that term? Or radical support is something else that you mentioned. Mike mentioned not bootstrapped, but customer funded, which I think is an awesome little twist that seems subtle, but I think it's spot on. So anyhow, what's your approach to, how did you come up with these sort of branded phrases, and do you even think of it like that?
I definitely do. I mean, I think one of the things is that I think you need to shock people a little bit sometimes, and that's the way you get them to think. So The fact that you said that really makes me feel good.
Okay.
It means that's actually it really had that meaning. But it also comes from, in the 70s, there was the concept of shareholder primacy.
Okay.
And shareholder primacy basically is shareholder supremacy. That's what it got evolved to. And that's what actually Simon Sinek calls it, is shareholder supremacy. Oh, okay. And the idea being behind shareholder supremacy is that everything you do, everything the managers do, everything the leaders of the company are doing is to increase the value of the shareholders' value.
Right.
At all costs. And that could mean if you're giving too much in terms of benefits to your employees, you need to scale those back, because that means you're not raising shareholder value. Right. That's shareholder supremacy. And it happens every day. You see it in all the examples of companies that just do absolutely nasty things. And you say, why? It's because of shareholder supremacy.
Right.
In business schools, they're driving that home in your head. That is the way to raise shareholder value. Well, employee supremacy, that's why I named it that, because it is the opposite. It's the shift in perception away from shareholder supremacy to employee supremacy. Okay. And the idea and this is even, I've had to have this discussion with my brothers who are shareholders of my company. I'm not saying you are the nastiest piece of scum over there and we're not going to, right. They are the ones who are helping us make this company work. Right. Without their early investment, I wouldn't be where we are today, or we wouldn't be where we are today. Yep. But what it really means is, what is the focus of your decision making? And There's many companies, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, which is a lot of companies that say we're employee first,
Right.
we really count on our employees, right?
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you have a down quarter. Oh, well, we were all about our employees until it's a down quarter. Hack off half the employees because we got to make things better for the shareholders.
Yeah, like right around Christmas time is a good time too.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have a story about that if we want to get back to that. But so that's really what employee supremacy is about, is that the leaders are not just saying our employees are important, they're actually the focus of our decision making. Because when it really comes down to it, who's sitting in front of your customers? Is it my team? Is it my sales team? Is it my CX team? Is it our finance team that are sitting in front of the customers, or is it the shareholders? Well, no, it's not the shareholders. Right. So why do we focus on them? So the idea is, and my brother put it really well, but I take a little spin on his. He ran this company. The company was Progress Software. His name's Joseph Alsop. And he always said, employees, customers, then shareholders. That is the order in which you make your decisions. And I've just taken it really a step further to say, no, the employees are first. They're number one. And I actually state it. When you state it in your operational model that you run under employee supremacy, what you're saying is we're putting a flag in the ground and we're saying that we focus on our employees first. Not that we don't believe the shareholders are important, right, or that the customers aren't important, but the way to make the customers happy is to focus on the employees. And then the customers spend more money, and then the shareholders are happy in the end. And that's what it really is all about, is you change your shift. And see, it really does need to come. It's not something that you can say, okay, I'm going to go to my lower managers and say, I'm going to have them focus on employee supremacy. Great, I want you to do that, but it has to come from the top. It has to come from the leaders of the organization. And so there are just examples that we do. We just announced a new benefit today, and it may not sound like much, but we're in Denver, and the company's in Denver, and we announced that we were going to pay for all the parking for employees in the parking garage that's recently been erected next to our building, so they didn't have to park on the streets and stuff. Oh, okay. Which was huge. You should have seen it, because they're like, we're in Denver. They were having to park 3 and 4 blocks away, and all of a sudden they're saying like, "Whoa, you're kidding me!" Right. And we have an employee travel fund. We pay for them to go on vacations because they say, I don't make a ton of money. I can't afford to go on vacations. We'll help pay for your vacation. So it's that kind of decision making that gets made where the employees start to say, you mean you care about me and not like the shareholders and what's going to happen in the growth of the business? Right. And the things they do for the company are absolutely amazing. We don't have to put in huge policies and things like that. So it is an incredible shift. It's something, as you can probably tell, I'm very excited about. It makes it a lot easier to run a company when you run it this way. Right. Because, if you're running a company and you're saying, okay, on one hand, I got to do what's best in the shareholders. And then on the other hand, I got to do best in my employees. But those two are in conflict. Right. A lot of times they're in conflict. So I couldn't sleep at night. Now I really sleep very well at night because we're in alignment on this. And my shareholders, super happy. Right. Super happy. So
yeah, even though that's
brothers. What it's all about. Yeah, even though exactly. And they've invested in some other businesses that weren't very happy because they went to zero, but they're still stuck by me. And they're very happy now.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't follow the line through to Progress Software. That's fast. I probably met your brother at some point. I'd be willing to bet.
Probably. He's now retired from the business, and
sure.
And there's a new CEO that's in there and stuff. But
right,
yeah,
that's funny. Okay, so this we could talk a lot about. So 2006 through 2012 or so, I was very heavily involved in what was at the time called Enterprise 2.0. It was the reinvention of what does it mean to have an enterprise, which was a lot of it was a shift to caring about your employees. Like, I stumbled onto user experience pretty early on, like the early 2000s. And why does it matter? Not only that, should the color of a button be green or red? Well, that's usability. You test that out. User experience says, should you have buttons at all? maybe you don't need button, right? So there's potentially a different. It can seem like a subtle thing, So instead of caring about shareholders, care about employees. It's that simple, right? It's not that simple. It seems like it should just be, oh yeah, all right. So we'll prioritize them first, right? Until we don't, like you said. So the whole movement there, the Enterprise 2.0, became enterprise social collaboration, then kind of disappeared, and in some ways either fell off the planet or got kind of really taken up by some companies. Thank God, because it was really more about how do you empower the people that make up your organization and treat them at least as well as your customers. To me, customers would usually come before shareholders at the least, and I do believe in empowering employees. But there's such an entrenched mantra that is not at all about employees. I mean, like human resources is, like, to me, incredibly insulting. I'm not a resource. I'm not. Yeah, I'm a. What's the? Oh man, what's the movie with the Planet of the Apes? Forgetting the line, right? But they're not human resources. Like talent management, to me, makes a whole lot more sense, right? There's sort of a whole realm of things that kicks it up a notch, I guess is what I'm getting at. So with employee supremacy, I love that sort of focus. That's really interesting. And like I said, I'm very keen on branding that I think is a huge part of making culture actually work. I don't know how many companies I've worked in or consulted to that had like a list of here's the 100 things that we care about, which clearly nobody cared about because they didn't even know any of them, right? But if you can make it so that it's like, soup is good food, like classic marketing and branding, you remember that, and you might remember it because it means something, and then you might actually do it. So employee supremacy, I haven't been aware of the shareholder supremacy, but that makes sense. What about your what's your radical support? What's the genesis of that? Is that pulling off of like Zappos or anything like that?
Yeah, basically, I wanted to. Well, this is in collaboration with a former director of customer experience that we had, and it was something where I had seen, and I'm trying to remember the company. It might have been Zappos or one of the others, Rackspace. They had a mantra about, and Rackspace was doing hosting and that was back in the day when I was very involved in hosting, way before cloud had really come around.
Right.
And the biggest problem with all those companies were they had a bunch of techies who were running the company, and when you went to get support, it was awful.
Right.
And so Rackspace had, and I can't remember what their mantra was, but it was very similar to something like radical support. And we've always had, whether it was my co-founder or director of customer experience, we've always had a strong philosophy that it's not, I'll just say that I don't know how many companies I've interacted with where, customer support is essentially seen as a drain on profits. Right. And they put as little as possible and just enough into it, just so they can make sure the customers are getting, a level of support. I've had an experience, and I won't say their name publicly, but just recently with one where they told me they weren't going to get back to me for 8 days on a critical issue that I needed. And I was like, 8 days? And they said, yeah, 8 days. I was like, okay. Whereas we have people at your beck and call on our business hours who are on chat and phone and everything else.
Yeah.
So radical support, I guess I've had enough of those experiences like that one I was just talking about,
right,
where I had had such bad experiences. I was like, I don't want to do this. And I think that also gets to the difference between employee supremacy and shareholder supremacy. Shareholder supremacy is saying only give customers as much as they need to keep them from canceling, but don't give them 1 second more, right? Not one more. If you're giving them more, you're wasting our money.
Right.
And that kind of BS really pisses me off.
Yep,
I would rather come from a point where I'm saying we're investing in it. We have 5 people in our customer experience department now, it's almost one of the largest departments behind sales.
Mm.
And that's not what people do. Usually in companies, they're basically, saying, let's not invest. Let's put on some more, drive them towards this, or make them go through these gates before they can actually get to us and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's where radical support came from. Is like, we want to give you a radical experience. It does kind of hit you in the head, just kind of like you were saying, by the radical portion of it or whatever.
Yep.
And so I think that that's where it came from. That was the desire we had. It was our, commitment to our customers. And if you look at any one of our reviews on G2 or any of the other places we have reviews, 99% of the time they're saying, I just can't believe how good the support was. Actually new. And you go back to it. I keep touting it, but as I've said in the past, we've only lost one employee has voluntarily left the company in 7 years out of all the employees that we've hired. And what that gives you is a continuity, so that when you talk to somebody about support, it's not like they've been there for 2 weeks and they just got through training.
Right.
Like the person sitting next to them. They actually know the product from the point when it started. And so, they know the product. That gives them a really good experience. And they go and they tell their other friends about it when they say, hey, I saw you got this visitor management. Yeah, they're great.
Right.
So anyhow, that's radical support definitely kind of ties into the whole thing as well.
Okay. Yeah. And so one of the things I think is probably one of the best things about being an entrepreneur, if you own the business, is it can be dangerous, but you can solve your own problem and to make sure that nobody else ever experiences it again.
Right. You mean the pain that you experience? You don't want to give that to anybody else. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And I feel the same way about, so about a year ago, I stopped being the only person that was, handling inbound queries, pre-sales or post-sales for Plexicam. And I like being connected so that we know what's going on. Is there a problem? We have manufactured goods, right? So if there's a manufacturing problem, we need to know as soon as possible, because then we got to fix it. And it's not just retype some code and you're done. You got to make another product. Right. So being connected is super helpful. I think that's part of what connects the employee customer sort of interface there, is actually listening and then doing something about it. And I don't know which is more astonishing, the listening or the doing part of it. Right. Because it's definitely both, because we have great word of mouth, and it's because like if even things we're sort of following the mold of Nordstrom to a certain extent. So I mean, I'm not going to exchange tires for you, but we go way beyond what you would normally expect, and certainly like who's ever talked to a human at Amazon, for example. Right. But that when you show that, if your employees care, I guess I'll sum it up like this: if your employees care about it, and I care because I'm the owner, but we have a handful of people that are contractors that we're building up. They care too. It makes it easier for them to do support, because then the customers are happy. They'll give you a lot more slack. They want to be friendly with you. Some of our best proponents are people that decided that Plexicam wasn't for them, but they so enjoyed the experience that they just like, I can't believe that you guys, I want to return this. They were all set to be angry and like, okay, no, that's fine. Just tell me, it's not a no questions asked policy. It's so what didn't work for you? Because I'd like to understand. And they're like, what? Yeah. What? Why? What a weirdo. Yeah. We've had people, we give a very similar experience where many times the customers will say, hey, it didn't work for me, but I actually know a couple people who would be a really great fit for. And we've gotten business out of it. Right. So yeah. And if you give them that experience, they're willing to do it, because then they know that this person I'm going to refer actually is going to get a great experience, not a robotic experience. That's just, right. Yeah, exactly. So I know we're starting to run out of time here. One thing I wanted to ask you, because you've been interviewed a lot, you guys are doing your own internal marketing and communications to talk about employee supremacy and whatnot. Is there anything that you've been wishing that somebody like me or anybody else doing podcasts would finally ask you, because you wanted to talk about it, you've never been asked? Wow.
and that's a question I've never been asked. So I don't know that I'm ready for it. Let me see. Is there any? I guess one might be, what are the impacts that you've seen? And I may have been asked this, so maybe I'm not telling the truth if I haven't been asked it before, but what are the impacts that you've seen from employee supremacy?
Okay.
In your own company?
Yeah.
And asking myself that question
yeah.
has been the sense of alignment with your employees. And you just think about the fact that in many cases, you're in opposition with your employees. And the shareholder supremacy and primacy puts you in an oppositional position in many cases. You have to raise profits. You have to increase the value of the shares for the shareholders at all costs.
Right.
And what does that usually mean? It means things like cutting benefits, cutting, vacation, doing things which you probably in your heart don't want to do.
Yep.
But you have to, because that's the pressure that you've been given. That's the mission or the thing that you have been told you have to do.
Right.
And so I've had some absolutely horrible experiences in my career where I ran companies because that's what I went to business school. They told me that's what you have to do. It's all about raising shareholder value. That's your first and only mission. And then I've made decisions that have been so awful upon reflection. And I'll just kind of close it out with that one that I did, which was that in one of my companies, I was running it here in Santa Fe, and it was a web development firm. We had gotten it up to about 20 employees. And then the economic downturn, a significant economic downturn in the 2000s happened. And as a result, when you have that kind of economic downturn and those things start to happen in 2001, is that you start to get rid of your worst employees first, and you get rid of your best employees last. Mm-hmm. And you made a point, and this is what I actually wanted to bring it about to, was on December 10th, I had one employee. Her name was Anne, and Anne was the hardest working person in the company. She stuck with us, but we were totally out of money. And mm-hmm. on December 10th, I said, I am sorry, I don't have any more. I can't even give you a severance. We're closing the doors. Oh, wow. And she won't talk to me to this day. Oh. And that was really as a result of what happens in that type of thinking when you're not aligned. Mm-hmm. So having that opportunity to be in alignment with your employees and make those decisions that you know are in their best interest, not just because you're an employee first company, but because you really believe in your heart that you want to do that's what's in their best interest, because they're the ones in front of the customers. They're the ones who are going to have to make hard decisions. They're the ones that have to represent the company. That is just really been really impactful for me. And so I guess that would be my question to myself then.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of question I like to ask when I'm doing consulting work. I've been watching you do your work, whatever. What is it that you've like? Why didn't this idiot ask me something about this, the thing that's killing me? So I'm glad that we had a chance to explore that. We can definitely, there's a ton of stuff that we could talk about, which I think we would have a lot of fun doing. But in the interest of making sure that you don't totally blow off your next meeting, I think we should wrap this up. But I just wanted to say thank you, Andy, for being on Next Future Today. Thank you to Michael for connecting the dots. I want to check in periodically with a button hit on record or not, and just see how things have been going for you. Because I think the kind of story that you are living is exactly what I want to point people to, that, even when it seems like the world's gone to hell, and it sure felt like it to a lot of us, you have some choices that you can make, and they're not always going to be the right choices. But if you can make choices and act on them and figure out if they potentially can work, then you have a chance of, fighting, living to see another day. So I really appreciate hearing more about your business and looking forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed it. And let's keep the discussion going. I agree.
Awesome. Say hi to Michael for me.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Bye.